And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Thursday, October 3rd, 2024. And this outlook is for Friday and Saturday. We start out with the state of the sea ice on this Thursday afternoon. No notable ice to report along the Chukchi Sea coastline or the Arctic Beaufort Sea coastline. There is ice, though, off of the Arctic coastline of Russia, and it has been there all season long. But again, we have begun the very slow process for ice growth to occur, so we're very, at least in the beginning stages of new season growth. But more importantly, we have a very deep low located, at least right now, it's just in this location at 950 millibars. That's about the lowest extent of the central pressure. And it has had storm force winds with hurricane force gusts along the western and southern quadrants as it worked its way across the western into the central Bering Sea. This low now will slowly begin to fill. Occluded front around the low, it's a very large circulation covering much of the Bering Sea, pushing up into western southern parts of the mainland. This front will gradually work its way east, northeastward along the Gulf Coast with bands of rain and rain showers and along with some gusty winds. But the most significant winds are expected to be from the Pribilovs down through the central eastern Aleutians tonight through Friday morning. We have high wind warnings in effect for those locations, the Pribilovs, eastern Aleutians, and central Aleutians, with the more notable winds continuing over the eastern Aleutians and at least up through the Pribilovs into Friday morning and afternoon. Now, as we get into Friday afternoon, the low center is located between Nunavik Island and the Pribilovs. It's going to slowly work its way southeastward across the southeast Bering Sea, pressure coming up to 958 millibars. Here comes the front with a band of rain and gusty winds along it. We expect strong easterly flow there into the entrance of Cook Inlet, 40-45 knot gales as a result. And then that initial front by Saturday afternoon will just end up dissipating to a trough, but providing areas of rain and rain showers all along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle with some gusty winds. Secondary low is going to take shape south of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. And this secondary low will eventually, as this low also pivots through, there'll just be a low pressure here of the central Gulf that'll pull back toward the western Gulf early next week, Monday into Tuesday. So in the meantime, Friday, look for north-northeast winds, 10 knots for the inner channels of the Panhandle, waves 2-3 feet. The outer coast winds will generally be east-southeast, anywhere from 15 to 25 knots. Strongest winds up there at Cape Suckling, 35-knot easterly gales, swells anywhere from 6 to as high as 9 feet. For Saturday, with that front pushing up along the Gulf Coast, we expect ahead of it southeast to south winds around 25 knots, inner channels with gusts upwards of 35 knots, Stevens Passage, and waves 5 to as high as 8 feet down here in Dixon Entrance once you get inside of the entrance. And for the outer coast, southwest to south winds 20-25 knots, kind of coming back toward the southeast up there toward Cape Suckling, and swells are generally going to be running 11-12 feet. Now on Friday, as that front pushes on up toward and into the entrance of Cook Inlet, Kennedy Entrance there, we are expecting southeasterly gales to 45 knots, 12 to 17 foot waves. As we are off the Kenai coast outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, southeast gales 35 to 40 knots, 11-12 foot swells. Within Prince William Sound, southeast winds to 30 knots, 7 foot waves. And up along the far north end of Cook Inlet, easterly winds 25 knots and 6-7 foot waves. Saturday, winds are going to come down across the region, generally south-southeast winds from outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance to off of the Kenai coast into Prince William Sound, right around 20 knots, 4 foot waves within Prince William Sound, 8 to 10 foot swells off of the Kenai coast, and 6 to 8 foot waves there in lower Cook Inlet with easterly winds, east-southeast winds right around 25 knots. Now the more notable winds will be impacting the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula Friday. We could see westerly gales to 45 knots either side there, Cold Bay and False Pass, with the largest waves in excess of 20 feet, upwards around and even over 25 feet there, just to the northwest and west of Cold Bay. As we go up the peninsula, Look for southwest to south winds 25 to 30 knots, 7-foot waves there within Shelikof Strait, 10 feet off of Akiak. And then for Saturday, with the low pressure center in this vicinity just outside of Bristol Bay, that low is going to drift southeastward across the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula. Ahead of it, winds will be south-southwest, 25 to 30 knots. As we switch around, look for southeast winds, 20 knots there within Bristol Bay, and then turning around to the west at 30 knots on the backside of the low circulation. And waves generally running 7 to as high as 11 feet on the North Pacific side, and 8 to as much as 16 feet there just north and northwest of Cold Bay. For Friday, strongest winds, eastern Aleutians, we're looking on the north side of the eastern Aleutians on the Bering side. 50-knot westerly storm force winds. That's why we have that high wind warning in effect for the eastern Aleutians into Friday afternoon. And as a result, waves could be in excess of 30 feet there north of the eastern Aleutians over the lower Bering Sea. Now further west, the winds fall off 40-45 knots Atka to Adak, and then generally at 35 to 30 knots once you get west of Adak out of the west. And for Saturday, winds will come down further. Eastern Aleutians still, though, westerly gales to 35 knots on Alaska through Nikolsky. As we head back toward west of Adak, look for west to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Along the southwest coast, 25-knot south winds into Bristol Bay on Friday. Southeast winds there in Kuskokwim Bay to 25 knots, 11-foot waves. We have that at least through Friday morning. The northern portion of Kuskokwim Delta coastline there, high surf advisory, 2 to 4 feet above the normal high tide. We have 40 to 45 knot north to west gales, St. Matthew down through St. Paul. And again, waves in the vicinity of the Pribilofs could be around in excess of 30 feet. Strong easterly flow off the mainland, 30 to 35 knot easterly flow out of Norton Sound in the lower Yukon Delta. And then on Saturday, with that low center slowly beginning to fill and heading southeastward, southeast winds 20 knots within the outer portion of Bristol Bay. Look for northeast winds 20 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay. Northeast winds 25 knots out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon coast with 5-foot waves. And then north to northwest winds to 30 knots, St. Matthew down to St. Paul with waves running 14 to 16 feet. Areas south of the Bering Strait on Friday will see east-northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, north side of St. Lawrence along the west side of the Seward Peninsula. Lower Chukchi Sea, east winds 25 to 30 knots south of Point Hope, waves 5 to 7 feet. As we go up the northwest coast, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Those turn around more to the east from Utqiagvik, Kaktovik, east winds 15 knots with waves around 3 feet. And then on Saturday, we find the winds northerly 25 to 30 knots lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait, 30 to 35 knots to the north side of St. Lawrence Island, where some of the waves will be up there 10, 14 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence. Northeast winds continue around 15 knots, Utqiagvik down through Point Lay, and then as we go eastward, winds will eventually turn back more east-southeasterly and be upwards of 25 knots there into the vicinity of Kaktovik with waves along the Arctic coastline, the Beaufort Sea coastline, generally running 5 to 7 feet on Saturday.